I was the only soul who came to my husband's burial. An entire sanctuary of empty benches faced me as I stood beside Arthur's cherrywood coffin. Our children, Marcus with his wife and Cynthia, had chosen business trips and getaways over their father's last farewell. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories travel. The funeral parlor director, a young man who looked barely out of college, seemed even more uncomfortable than I was as he eyed the empty seats. It was a gray, dreary November Monday in Savannah, Georgia, when the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to weep or just threaten. Arthur always despised indecision. "Mrs. Dubois, would you like to wait a few more minutes?" he asked, trying to be discreet as he checked his watch. "We can begin," I replied. My voice was steadier than I felt. Arthur hated being late. The preacher, a man who had never met my husband in life, started reciting generic platitudes about a good man and a life well lived, while I fixed my gaze on the spray of white hydrangeas on the coffin lid. Arthur would have preferred something simpler, maybe just the deep blue hydrangeas from our own backyard, the ones he faithfully tended for 43 years. I sat alone in the front pew. 5 empty chairs beside me screamed louder than any sermon. Our 2 children, their spouses, our grandson Leon, not a single one of them was here. Marcus had sent a text message the night before. "Sorry, Mama. Urgent client in Dallas. Can't change it. I'll call you next week." No further explanation, no attempt to shift his schedule to say goodbye to the man who raised him. I pictured him in some high-rise office, checking his watch, vaguely aware that a funeral was happening 1,000 miles away. Cynthia was worse. She didn't even send a text. Her assistant called to say Cynthia was unavailable and couldn't travel. Unavailable. As if we were discussing a Sunday dinner, not the final goodbye to the man who taught her how to ride her bicycle. When the short service concluded, I followed the coffin to the gravesite. The cold wind bit at my cheeks, but I didn't shed a tear. Not because I wasn't grieving, but because I had cried so much over the last few weeks, I felt I was all out of tears. The coffin was lowered into the earth, and I tossed a handful of dirt onto the lid. It hit the wood with a hollow final sound, like the echo of my own footsteps in the house that was now empty. I returned home. The same house where we raised those children, where Arthur and I built a life for nearly 5 decades. His house slippers were still parked next to his recliner. The television remote was right where he'd left it. The silence was overwhelming. I poured myself a small glass of the good brandy we saved for special occasions. This wasn't special, but it felt necessary. Driven by an impulse I couldn't name, I picked up my phone and opened Facebook. Cynthia's profile was the first thing on my feed. She had posted 3 hours ago, right in the middle of her father's service. It was a picture of her on a boat, a mimosa glass raised high, a bright smile on her face. The caption read, "Living my best life." I swallowed hard. My daughter wasn't unavailable. She was on a boat, celebrating, while I was burying her father. I kept scrolling. Marcus had also posted a selfie from a boardroom with a caption about closing the big one and making moves. No mention of his father, not a single word about loss, as if this were just any other Tuesday. I turned off the phone and took a long sip of the brandy. On the wall opposite me was a photo from our 40th anniversary. Arthur and I were smiling, holding hands in front of the hydrangea bushes he planted when we first moved in. They were blooming a vibrant blue in that picture. Now, like him, they were dormant. "Tomorrow," I said out loud to the empty room, "I'm calling Mr. Fontaine." Mr. Fontaine had been our lawyer for over 30 years. He'd drafted our will just 2 years ago, back when everything seemed simple and right. Half to Marcus, half to Cynthia, with a small trust set aside for Leon, our only grandchild. The house for both of them to sell or keep, the small lake cabin for them to enjoy as a family. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the same spot where Arthur used to make waffles every Sunday without fail. He always made extra, just in case the kids stopped by, even years after they'd moved out. "You never know when they might show up," he'd say with that hopeful look. They rarely showed, only when they needed something. I opened the desk drawer where we kept the important papers. I ran my fingers over the neat envelopes, bills, deeds, insurance, until I found the blue folder labeled Last Will and Testament. The document Arthur and I had signed 2 years prior now felt like a relic from another life, a time when we still believed our children valued us, a time when family and love still felt like the same thing. I closed the folder and went to our bedroom. Arthur's pills were still on the nightstand. The doctor had said it would be quick, but it wasn't. It was 6 months of a slow fade, of clinic visits, of hope rising and crashing. 6 months during which Marcus visited twice and Cynthia only once, both of them armed with excuses about work, their lives, their commitments. When Arthur finally passed, it was a regular Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand. He opened his eyes, squeezed my hand, and said, "You were always the strongest part of me, Mildred." And then he was gone. I called the children right away. Marcus said he'd try to come for the weekend. Cynthia promised to get the first flight she could. Neither of them followed through. The next morning, I called Mr. Fontaine. His secretary answered, and when she heard my voice, her tone softened. "Mrs. Dubois, my deepest condolences. We just heard about Mr. Arthur." "Thank you, Rhonda. I need to make an appointment with Mr. Fontaine. It's urgent. He has an opening tomorrow at 10 a.m. Does that work?" "Perfect." I slept poorly, not because of the decision I'd made, but in spite of it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose, a sharp clarity. It was as if Arthur was right there beside me, nodding his quiet approval. Mr. Fontaine's office smelled of old law books and fresh coffee. He stood when I entered, his face a mask of sincere sympathy. "Mildred, it's good to see you, though I wish it weren't under these circumstances. I'm so sorry about Arthur. He was a fine man." "Thank you, Mr. Fontaine. He truly was." I sat in the leather chair across from his large desk. "I need to change our will." He nodded, not looking surprised. Many widows came through here with the same request. "I understand. Are you looking to make some minor adjustments?" "I want to remove Marcus and Cynthia completely." This time he was surprised. He slowly took off his reading glasses. "Completely?" "Everything. I want everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, the investments, to go to Leon." "Your grandson." "Yes." Mr. Fontaine cleared his throat. "Mildred, I know this is a painful time, but decisions made in the depths of grief can be—" "I buried Arthur alone," I interrupted. My voice was quiet, but firm. Neither of my children came to the funeral. Cynthia was on a boat drinking mimosas. Marcus was in a business meeting he could have moved. Meanwhile, Leon called me every single day during his grandfather's illness. He was the one who came over to cut our grass when Arthur got too weak. He was the one who drove me to the clinic on nights when my hands were shaking too badly to drive. He's only 21 years old, but he has more character and compassion than both his parents combined. Mr. Fontaine was quiet for a long moment. "I understand," he finally said. "We will prepare the new documents. I should tell you, your children can contest this decision after your passing. They can try, but I want it structured in the most secure way possible. A trust for Leon, one that his parents cannot touch. That can be arranged." He made some notes. "Do you want to set any conditions for Leon's access to the inheritance?" "Just that he cannot access the principal until he turns 30, except for education or medical needs. That's sensible for a young man." Mr. Fontaine nodded. "I'll have everything ready for you to sign by the end of the week." Leaving his office, I felt a great weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was honoring Arthur's memory in the only way I had left, ensuring his legacy went to the one person who truly valued him. I walked slowly to my car, watching the people on the street. A mother and her little boy walked by, both laughing at some private joke. I didn't feel envy, just a quiet acknowledgement that family bonds are far more complicated than they appear in photographs. That night, for the first time since Arthur died, I didn't wear his old cardigan to bed. I lay in our bed, now just my bed, and let the silence settle around me. It was no longer a painful silence, but a peaceful one. Arthur used to say, "True love doesn't ask for a receipt, but it deserves respect." Our children had forgotten that lesson, but I had not. The papers were signed on a cloudy Thursday. Mr. Fontaine watched as I moved the pen over the dotted lines with quiet resolve. I didn't hesitate once. When you bury your husband alone while your children post party pictures, legal documents lose their intimidation. "It's done," Mr. Fontaine said, gathering the pages. "The process will be discreet, but I must warn you, at some point Marcus and Cynthia will find out." "I know," I replied, placing my pen back in my purse. "And when they do, let them hear it from me." Leaving the office, I felt a strange sense of release. Not joy, not vengeance, just a settled account. The weight of trying to maintain an illusion was gone. The illusion that my children were still the people Arthur and I had raised them to be. Back home, I opened a closet I hadn't touched in months. Inside were file boxes, organized by year, each one holding checks, bank statements, and receipts. A careful accounting not just of our money, but of the one-sided generosity that had defined my relationship with my children for decades. I pulled out the folder labeled Marcus, Business, and School. Inside was a collection of expenses that added up to more than what most people earn in a lifetime. The tuition for his MBA at that fancy private university. The $60,000 for the seed money in his first tech startup, which failed in less than a year. The $15,000 for the down payment on the condo he had to have to impress his clients. The luxury car to keep up appearances. With every request, Arthur would sigh, but he would always give in. "He's our son," he'd say. "One day he'll stand on his own." That day never came. Cynthia's folder was just as thick. The extravagant wedding that cost as much as a small house. The high-end kitchen remodel on the penthouse she deserved after her promotion. The vacations to Europe to recover from stress. The private school for Leon, which was absolutely essential for his future. Every request came with a vague promise of more visits, more calls, more connection. Promises that evaporated the moment the money cleared. What struck me now, looking at those numbers, wasn't the amount. It was the pattern. There was never any real gratitude, just a constant, entitled expectation that we would always be there to fund their lives. As if our money, earned from decades of hard work and careful saving, was somehow just their inheritance paid out early. I closed the folders and put them back, not out of guilt, but to keep them as evidence. Not for a court, but for my own heart. The phone rang at 7:32 p.m. that night. Leon's name flashed on the screen. "Grandma? Can I stop by tomorrow? I found some old jazz records at the shop and... Well, I thought you might like to listen to them." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Of course, baby. Come for lunch." The next day, I made gumbo, Arthur's favorite. Leon arrived at noon, carrying a canvas bag of old records and wearing his grandfather's same gentle smile. We ate on the back porch, talking about simple things. He told me about his classes, his part-time job at the university library, his thoughts about graduate school. He spoke with enthusiasm, but without the frantic, grasping ambition that always defined his mother and uncle. "You know," he said, helping himself to more salad. "I think a lot about how Grandpa saw the world. He always said success wasn't about having the most. It was about needing the least." I smiled. Those were Arthur's exact words. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Leon." "You really think so?" There was a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me of him as a little boy, always seeking approval, never demanding it. I'm sure of it. After lunch, he insisted on washing the dishes. As he dried the plates, he mentioned he was thinking about applying for a summer research program in Gullah-Geechee history, but he was worried about the cost. How much is it? I asked casually. He named a sum that was less than 1/10 of what his uncle had asked for his last investment. Apply, I said simply. But Grandma, it's expensive, and I know, I interrupted gently. Who do you think your grandfather and I saved all our lives for? He fell silent, polishing a plate that was already dry. For moments like this, I continued, to help people who actually value the opportunity. When he left, carrying the leftover gumbo I insisted he take, I stood at the door, watching his beat-up old car pull away. The contrast between him and his parents had never been sharper. Cynthia called the next day. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since the funeral she'd missed. Mom. Her voice was already irritated. Leon told me you're paying for this history program. No, hello. No, how are you? Straight to the money. Good morning to you too, Cynthia. I'm sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I'm just worried. You just lost Dad. You shouldn't be making major financial decisions right now. I took a deep breath. Actually, I've made several important financial decisions recently. What? What kind of decisions? The anxiety in her voice wasn't for me. It was for her inheritance. Why don't you come visit me? We can talk about it in person. There was a pause. I'm really busy with work, Mom. You know how it is. Yes, I know exactly how it is. My voice was quiet. It was the same reason you couldn't make it to your father's funeral while you were on a boat with mimosas. Silence on the other end. How did you know about that? Facebook, Cynthia. You posted pictures during your father's burial. Another silence, this one followed by a rush of excuses. Mom, that was complicated. I was going through a lot emotionally and… Spare me the details, I interrupted. Come see me if you want to talk. Otherwise, I'll just assume you're too busy as usual. I hung up the phone before she could reply. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from relief. Decades of swallowing my words, of looking the other way, of making excuses for the inexcusable. It was finally over. Marcus showed up the next day without calling, just as he always did when he needed something. His luxury sedan pulled into the driveway with that aggressive rev of the engine that always set my teeth on edge. Mama, he said, giving me a brief, one-armed hug. Are you all right? You look worn out. I'm fine, Marcus. What brings you here? He looked around the living room as if checking the value of the furniture. Cynthia told me about your conversation. We're worried about you. Are you? Of course, he said, sitting on the sofa, the same one Arthur used to sit on. Losing Dad. It was hard on all of us. I imagine it was, I replied, though some seemed to have handled it better than others. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Look, Mama, about the funeral. I really couldn't cancel that Dallas meeting. It was critical for the business. I know. I sat across from him. The same business your father and I gave you $60,000 to start. He blinked, surprised by the directness. I never brought up the money. That was years ago. Yes, it was. As were the $100,000 for the down payment on your house, and the $30,000 to clear your credit card debt when your first venture failed, and the… Well, why are we talking about this now? He interrupted, looking truly uneasy. Because your father is gone, Marcus, and I'm taking inventory. Not just of our assets, but of our choices. He shifted in his seat. What exactly does that mean? It means I've modified the will. You and Cynthia have been removed. The shock on his face would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Removed? You can't just… I can, and I did. Everything goes to Leon. Leon? His voice went up an octave. My nephew is just a kid. He's 21. He's a college student, and he has more integrity in his little finger than you've shown me in 20 years. Marcus stood up, his face turning a dark red. This is unfair. It's the grief talking, Mama. You're not thinking straight. On the contrary, I replied, my voice calm. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years. Your father built everything we have with hard work and principles. Principles you and your sister seem to have forgotten. This is about the funeral, isn't it? I already told you I couldn't make it. No, Marcus. The funeral was just the period at the end of a very long sentence. A lifetime of taking without giving. Of demanding without ever thanking. Of treating your parents like an ATM, not like people who loved you unconditionally. He was quiet for a second, then tried a new tactic. Mama, let's talk about this calmly. Maybe we can come to an agreement, something that... There is no agreement to be made. The decision is final. You're going to regret this, he said, grabbing his car keys. Cynthia and I can contest the will. You know that. You can try, I replied, but you'd only be proving my point. He slammed the front door shut. Through the window, I watched him immediately get on his phone, no doubt calling Cynthia. I could almost hear the frantic conversation, the accusations, the plans to handle me. That night, for the first time since Arthur died, I opened the bottle of good brandy we saved for special occasions. I poured a small glass and took it out to the porch. The hydrangeas Arthur tended so carefully were starting to wilt with the coming winter, but there were still a few stubborn blue blossoms holding on. Like me. Looking at the garden, I remembered something Arthur used to say. Love is like these bushes, Mildred. It needs constant care, regular pruning, and sometimes it needs to face a hard frost to bloom again. Our frost had arrived, and I was ready to see it through. 3 days passed in a strange quiet. No calls from Marcus or Cynthia, just a text from Leon asking if I needed anything from the grocery store. The calm before the storm, I thought, watering the plants in the kitchen. The storm arrived on Thursday in the form of Cynthia and her husband, Greg, pulling into the driveway in their gleaming SUV. She didn't bother to knock. She never did. She just walked in as if the house was still hers to command. Mom, she said, dropping her expensive purse on the entryway table. We need to talk. Greg lingered a few steps behind her, looking awkward as always. He never really fit in. Always checking his phone during Sunday dinners, always looking at the door as if planning his escape. Good morning to you too, Cynthia, I replied calmly, setting my watering can down. Is it true what Marcus told me? I put the can on the floor and turned to face her. My daughter. So physically like me, yet so different in every way that mattered. Her eyes, the same as mine, were now narrowed with anger. Depends on what he told you. That you disinherited us. That you're giving everything to Leon. This is insane, Mom. I gestured to the sofa. She hesitated, then sat on the very edge, rigid. Greg remained standing, already looking at his phone. It's not insane, Cynthia. It's a consequence. A consequence of what? Of not making it to a funeral? The coldness in her voice was like a slap. It wasn't just the absence. It was the complete failure to understand the gravity of that moment. You really think it's just about the funeral? She crossed her legs, smoothing her designer skirt. What else could it be? I took a deep breath. Your father was sick for 6 months, Cynthia. 6 months. You visited once. For less than 2 hours. Before you invented an emergency at work. 6 months where you didn't call to ask how he was. And when he died, you chose a boat trip over saying goodbye. I was processing it in my own way, she defended. Not everyone deals with grief the same. That's not dealing with grief. That's ignoring it. She looked to her husband for support, but he was busy scrolling through an email. And what about Leon? She continued. He barely knew Dad. Why does he deserve everything and we get nothing? The injustice of that statement was almost laughable. Leon visited your grandfather every single week. He read to your father when his eyesight started to fail. Leon helped me organize the medications. He drove me to the clinic on nights when I couldn't drive. He knew him, Cynthia, and more importantly, he cared. This isn't fair, she said, her voice rising. We are entitled to that inheritance. It's ours by law. Actually, it isn't. The assets are mine now, and I can decide who they go to when I pass. Greg finally put his phone away, sensing the shift in tone. Mrs. Dubois, he intervened. Cynthia is just worried about you. Decisions made during grief can be— Spare me your false concern, Greg, I cut him off. Neither of you worried about me or Arthur, except when you needed money for a remodel or a vacation. The silence that followed was thick. Cynthia looked genuinely shocked, not by the accusation, but by the fact I had finally said it out loud. How can you say that? She whispered. We're your family. Family. My voice was low, but it didn't shake. Family visits, family calls. Family shows up for the hard times, not just on holidays when there are expensive gifts involved. Cynthia stood up, her face flushed. You're being cruel. Dad would never approve of this. Your father, I replied calmly, sat in that chair for 6 months, waiting for his children to come see him one last time. He died disappointed. Don't you dare talk to me about what he would approve of. She snatched her purse from the table. This isn't over, Mom. Marcus is already talking to a lawyer. You can't just cut us off like this. Actually, I can. And I did. When they left, I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, with the same quiet firmness that had held me together since Arthur's death. I returned to the back porch to my plants. The watering can was still on the floor where I'd left it. I finished watering the azaleas, Arthur's favorites, and sat down in his rocking chair. The phone rang inside the house. I let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, it rang again and then again. On the 4th try, I picked it up. Hello, Mildred? It's Samuel. The voice of our next-door neighbor sounded worried. Is everything all right? I saw Cynthia practically run out of your house. Samuel and his wife, Thelma, had lived next door for over 30 years. They knew our family better than anyone. I'm fine, Samuel. Just settling some old accounts. I understand, he said, and by his tone, I knew he really did. Thelma and I were wondering, would you like to come over for supper tonight? Nothing formal, just some company. I hesitated. Since Arthur's death, I had avoided social gatherings, but suddenly the idea of sitting with old friends, people who truly knew Arthur and me, felt like a balm. I'd love to, Samuel. Thank you. That evening, in the cozy warmth of our neighbor's house, with the smell of good jambalaya in the air, I told them everything. About the lonely funeral, about the decision to change the will, about the ugly confrontations with my children. Thelma held my hand across the table. You did what you had to do, Mildred. Arthur would have understood. They're my children, I murmured, finally feeling the tears I'd held back for so long. How did we get to this point? Samuel, always the practical one, poured me more sweet tea. Sometimes folks take paths we can't understand. You and Arthur gave them every opportunity, all the love. What they did with that was their choice, not yours. Thelma nodded. Some people don't know how to value what they have until it's gone. And Leon? Am I doing the right thing by him? I asked. That boy has a good head on his shoulders, Samuel said. Arthur always said so. If only Marcus and Cynthia were more like that boy, he used to say. I returned home feeling lighter, not because of the decision itself, that was already firm, but because I had shared the burden, because I had been heard without judgment. The next morning, a letter arrived. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Marcus. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten letter. This was new. I took it out to the porch with a cup of tea. The envelope was heavy, on his expensive office stationery. I opened it slowly. "Mom," it began. "After thinking about our conversation, I realize you might be right about a few things. I haven't been the son I should have been to you and Dad these last few years. Work, life. It all just seemed to get in the way. And without noticing, I put you both second. About the funeral, there's no excuse. I should have been there. I should have said goodbye to Dad. That's a failure I'll have to live with. As for the will, I understand your disappointment, even if it hurts. Leon is a good kid and deserves to be recognized. Maybe we can talk about a distribution that acknowledges your feelings, but doesn't completely cut off your own children. Please think about it. We are family, after all. Love, Marcus." I reread the letter 3 times. It was apologetic, almost sincere. Almost. The mention of the distribution revealed the true motive. Not real remorse, but a negotiation. Still, it was something. I left the letter on the table without answering. A few words on paper didn't erase decades of neglect, and one letter didn't undo the image of Arthur waiting for visits that never came. Leon showed up that afternoon carrying a toolbox. "Grandma, I noticed the handrail on the back steps is loose. Thought I'd fix it for you." I watched him work, his careful, steady movements so much like Arthur's. The way he frowned in concentration, how he measured twice before making a single cut. "Leon," I said when he finished, "there's something I need to tell you." We sat on the newly repaired steps. I explained the change to the will, my decision to leave everything to him. He was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on his own hands. "Grandma," he finally said, I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything special." "That's exactly why you do deserve it," I replied. "You didn't do any of it expecting something in return. You were just here, because you cared." "Mom and Uncle Marcus are going to be furious," he muttered. "They already are." He shook his head slowly. "I don't want to be the reason for more fighting in the family." I took his hands in mine. They were working hands, calloused, so different from his mother's manicured ones. "Leon, your grandfather built everything we have with honesty and hard work. He valued people who did the same. You are the right person to carry on what he started." He nodded, his eyes shining. "I'll try not to let either of you down." "I know you won't." When he left, I stayed sitting on the porch until the sun went down. The sky turned shades of orange and deep purple. The first stars came out. "Am I doing the right thing, Arthur?" I asked the quiet evening. The silence that came back felt like peace, as if the universe itself was nodding. The following week, I got a call from Mr. Fontaine. "Mildred, I'm just calling to let you know that Marcus reached out to my office." I sighed. What did he want? To know if the will had been officially filed. When I confirmed it had, he started asking about grounds for a contest. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That it is your right to dispose of your assets as you see fit, and that the document is ironclad." "Thank you, Mr. Fontaine." "He mentioned he would try to talk to you again," the lawyer added. "He said he has a compromise proposal." "I'm sure he does." I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Arthur and I had coffee every single morning for almost 50 years, where the children did their homework, where we celebrated birthdays and promotions. I picked up a notebook and started to write. Not a will, but a letter. An explanation. Something for Marcus and Cynthia to read after I was gone. Not an accusation, but a testimony. "My dear children," I began. "If you are reading this, I am gone. I want you to understand that the decision I made was not out of anger or revenge. I wrote for hours, pouring decades of love, disappointment, and finally, acceptance onto the page. I told them about the dreams Arthur and I had for them, about how we watched with a growing sadness as time and money built a wall between us, about how, in the end, it wasn't the money that mattered, but the presence, the time, the small kindnesses that make up a family, and about how, despite it all, I still loved them. Because a mother's love doesn't just turn off, even when it's been wounded. I finished the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote on the front, "To be opened after my passing." I put it back in the same drawer where Arthur kept his most important papers. The doorbell rang at 10 gar the next morning. Marcus stood on the porch, not in his usual power suit, but in jeans and a simple polo shirt. He looked almost like himself again. "Mama?" he said. "Can we talk?" I let him in. He looked around, as if seeing the house for the first time in years. "You changed the curtains," he observed. "Yes, 2 years ago." He nodded, embarrassed. "Can I sit down?" I gestured to the sofa. He sat stiffly like a guest, not like the boy who grew up in this house. "I got your letter," I began, "and I spoke with Mr. Fontaine. Mama, before you say anything, I want you to know that I understand. Your disappointment. We weren't the children we should have been." "No, you weren't." He seemed a little surprised by my directness. He expected me to soften it, as I always had. "About the will," he continued, "I thought of a solution that could work for everyone. A compromise. I'm listening." Cynthia and I agree that Leon deserves recognition. He was there when we weren't. So, we propose 50% for Leon and 25% for each of us. I looked at my son. This man I had rocked to sleep. This man I had taught to walk and talk. This man who was now negotiating percentages with me as if we were in a boardroom. "Marcus," I said calmly, "this is not a negotiation. It's not a business deal. It's a decision based on who proved they understood the real value of what your father and I built." "But we're your children," he insisted, a flash of his old frustration in his voice. "That has to count for something." "It does count. That's why I spent decades helping you two. Paying for your MBA, for Cynthia's wedding, for the cars, for the down payments, for the emergencies. You already received your inheritance, Marcus. Several times over." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, but understanding. As if he finally, truly, grasped the scale of what he had lost. Not the money, but something far more valuable. I really messed up, didn't I?" he mumbled. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He stood up slowly. "I'm going to think about all this, Mama." "You do that." At the door, he paused. "I miss him," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Talking about his dad. I only realized how much I miss him when it was too late. "I miss him too," I replied, "every single day." After he left, I went back to the porch. The hydrangea bushes were starting to show the first signs of new life after their dormant winter. Tiny green shoots were emerging on the stems that had looked dead for weeks. Perhaps, I thought, something was stirring in Marcus too. Not enough to change my decision, that was final, but maybe, just maybe, enough for him to start understanding what he had truly lost. And maybe that was a legacy more valuable than any inheritance. Spring arrived without fanfare, painting the garden with new colors. The hydrangeas Arthur loved so much bloomed again, stubborn and blue as he always was. I spent my mornings on the porch, watching the hummingbirds. Small daily miracles Arthur and I used to point out to each other. 6 months had passed since I changed the will. 6 months of quiet and halting reconciliations. Marcus called weekly now, not to talk about money, but just to ask how I was. The calls were brief, sometimes awkward, but they were genuine. Cynthia was another story. After our confrontation, she had retreated into a hurt silence. She sent occasional texts about trivial things, but she avoided any mention of the will or her father, as if she could erase the reality by ignoring it. Leon had become my constant. He came for Sunday lunch, sometimes bringing books or small gifts. Not the expensive, impersonal things his mother used to give, but things he knew I would actually appreciate. A rare blend of tea, a handcrafted bookmark, a mug with a quote from a poet Arthur and I both loved. That particular Sunday, he arrived with a thick folder under his arm. "What's that?" I asked as we fixed lunch together. He smiled, that shy smile that so reminded me of Arthur. "A project I wanted to show you before I start." After lunch, he spread papers on the table. Blueprints, drawings, budgets. "Remember we talked about doing something with the house and the cabin?" He pointed to the drawings. "I was thinking of turning the lake cabin into a small community library and reading room. This area doesn't have one, and there are so many kids." I looked at the detailed plans, the care evident in every line. "And this," he continued, showing another set of drawings, "is for the main house. Eventually. Not now, of course," he added quickly. "But one day. A community center for seniors. A place where people like you can meet, learn new things, share skills." I looked at my grandson, no longer a boy, but a man with vision and a good heart. A man who saw property not as a status symbol, but as an opportunity to build something. "Your grandfather would have loved this," I said, my voice thick. Leon smiled. "Remember how he always said an empty house is a waste of possibilities?" I remembered perfectly. It was one of Arthur's favorite sayings, especially after the kids moved out and their rooms sat empty. "Leon, these plans are wonderful, but this is going to cost a lot of money." He nodded. "I know. I'm saving up, and I have some friends from college who work in social architecture who are willing to help with the design." "Why don't we start now?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised. "Now? But you'll need—" "Leon," I interrupted gently. "I'm almost 80 years old. I'd rather see these plans become a reality while I'm still here to enjoy them." The smile that spread across his face was worth every penny Arthur and I had ever saved. The following week, I took Leon to the bank. We opened a joint account, and I transferred enough money to start the cabin project. Not all the money. I still had enough sense to secure my own future, but enough for him to launch his dream. The bank manager, a man who had known Arthur and me for decades, watched us with a knowing smile. "Arthur would be proud," he said as we signed the last paper. "Yes," I agreed. "He always said money is just a tool. It's how you use it that matters." Leaving the bank, Leon seemed almost overwhelmed by the weight of it. "Grandma, I promise. I'll do everything right. Every penny will be used properly." I squeezed his arm. "I know, sweetie. That's why we're doing this." The news reached Marcus and Cynthia faster than I expected. We didn't tell them, but in a small town like ours, secrets have short legs, especially when they involve bank accounts and construction. Marcus called that same night. "Mama, I heard you and Leon opened a joint account." For the first time in years, I felt no need to explain or justify. "Yes, we did." A pause. "Can I ask what for?" "To fund a project. Leon is going to turn the lake cabin into a community library." Another, longer pause. I understand." His voice sounded strangely flat. That's an interesting idea." It was his idea. Completely. "Well, if you need any help with the documentation, permits, anything legal, I'm available." The offer stunned me. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll let Leon know." After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. It was not the reaction I had expected. Cynthia showed up the next morning, without Greg, without the flashy SUV. She was driving a small, discreet car I didn't even know she owned. "Mom," she said, standing at the door, "can we talk?" I let her in, a little weary. Our last meeting had not been pleasant. She sat down at the kitchen table where we always had our hardest conversations. She looked different. Less makeup, simpler clothes. "I heard about Leon," she began. "The library at the cabin." I nodded, waiting for the explosion. Instead, she surprised me. I think it's a wonderful idea." "You do?" She nodded, staring into the cup of coffee I'd poured her. "Dad always talked about doing something like that. Remember? He had that idea about starting a reading room for the neighborhood kids." I remembered. Of course I did. It was one of Arthur's dreams that never got off the ground, always put off for after retirement, after the kids finished college, after we have more time, and after never came. "Leon remembered that," I said quietly. "He paid attention when your father spoke." A shadow crossed Cynthia's face. I should have paid more attention too. We were silent for a moment, the old clock on the wall ticking in the background. "I'm getting a divorce," she said abruptly. "What?" She gave a sad little smile. "Ironic, isn't it? After everything you and Dad invested in that extravagant wedding." I didn't know what to say. Cynthia and Greg had been together for almost 20 years, though they rarely seemed happy. "What happened?" She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I realized we built a life based on appearances. Too big a house, too expensive a car, too many parties, and no real substance." She looked me right in the eye. "Since you changed the will, I've done a lot of thinking. About what really matters. About who really matters. Mom, you were right." She wiped at a tear. "I became exactly the kind of person Dad always warned me about. Someone who values things over people. Who measures success by what they own, not by who they are." She paused. "And I lost the chance to say goodbye to him." "It's never too late to change, Cynthia." She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "For some things it is. I can never apologize to Dad. But you can honor what he valued from here on out." That afternoon, I drove her to the cemetery. We stood in front of Arthur's simple grave, now covered with the blue hydrangeas I brought every week. Cynthia knelt, placing her hand on the headstone, as if she could finally make the connection she'd refused to make in his final months. I left her alone, giving her the space she never gave Arthur. From a distance, I watched my daughter, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A late goodbye, but maybe not too late for her. On the way back, she asked me about Leon's project. "Can I help? Somehow? I have experience in marketing. I can help with outreach, getting book donations." "I'm sure Leon would appreciate that," I replied. "Why don't you talk to him?" Will he want my help? After everything?" "Leon doesn't hold grudges. In that, he's just like his grandfather." The following Sunday, for the first time in years, I had both my children and my grandson at the same table. The meal started out tense. Marcus and Cynthia were visibly awkward. Leon was cautiously polite. But as we ate, something started to shift. Marcus asked genuine questions about the library plans. Cynthia offered practical suggestions for outreach and fundraising. Leon listened, answered, and even laughed at one of Marcus's bad jokes. It wasn't perfect. Some wounds were too deep to heal in one afternoon. But it was a start. As we were having coffee on the porch, Marcus cleared his throat, just like he did when he was nervous. "Leon," he said, "your project with Grandma. It's an excellent idea. Something Grandpa would have loved." Leon looked at him, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, Uncle. If you need help with the legal side, permits, contracts, I'm at your disposal," Marcus offered. "And I can help with the marketing," Cynthia added. "Set up a website, social media, promote it." Leon looked at me, confused by this sudden turnaround. I gave him a small, encouraging nod. That would be great," he finally said. "I'm planning to start the renovation next month." And so, On a warm Sunday afternoon, something small began to grow between my children and my grandson. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a quiet acknowledgement of a possible future. When everyone had left, I sat on the porch, looking at the garden Arthur and I had built together. The hydrangeas were in full bloom. "Would you see this as a new beginning, Arthur?" I asked the wind. "Or just convenience?" I could almost hear him answer, with that dry little chuckle he had. "Maybe it's both, Mildred. And maybe it doesn't matter, as long as everyone grows in the process." That night, I slept better than I had in months. The cabin renovation began on a sunny Monday in April. Leon had put together a small team, friends from school, some local volunteers, and, to my surprise, Marcus and Cynthia. Marcus showed up early, wearing jeans and an old t-shirt I didn't even know he owned. He brought the building permits, already approved. "Used a few contacts," he admitted. "It's the least I can do." Cynthia arrived soon after, with coffee and donuts for everyone. Her hair was in a simple ponytail. She also brought a laptop and organized folders. "I started the social media pages," she explained, showing off the website she'd built for the future Arthur Dubois Community Library. "We already have pledges for over 500 books." I watched my children working side by side with Leon, Marcus holding ladders, Cynthia organizing volunteers, both of them taking direction from their nephew with a humility I had never seen in them. It wasn't perfect. There were tense moments, awkward silences when Arthur's name came up. But there was also something new: respect. At the end of the first day, we all sat on the porch, exhausted. Marcus had dirt on his pants. Cynthia had paint in her hair. Leon was smiling more openly than I'd seen in years. "Grandpa would have loved this," he said, looking at the cabin where the old windows were being removed for larger ones. "Yeah, he would have," Marcus agreed, surprising everyone. He always talked about creating spaces for people to grow. I think I only recently understood what he meant." Cynthia nodded silently, watching the sun go down. In the weeks that followed, a routine formed. Marcus came on weekends, bringing materials he got at a discount through his business. Cynthia showed up almost daily, coordinating donations and fundraising. Leon was the heart of it all, patient and determined. I watched it all with a mix of joy and a deep, complex sadness. Joy for the project, pride in Leon, and a melancholy that Marcus and Cynthia were finally showing the qualities Arthur and I had always hoped to see. Too late for him to witness it. One afternoon, I found Cynthia alone in the cabin, organizing donated children's books. "It's a good start," I said, looking at the shelves. She nodded. "You know what's weird? I'm enjoying this more than my actual job." "That's not so strange," I replied. "Your father always said doing for others brings a satisfaction money can't buy." She smiled. "He told me that so many times. I wasn't listening." We were quiet. "Mom," she said, "about the will. I understand why you did it. And it's okay. Leon deserves it. He was there. But I want you to know, I'm not doing this to get back in your good graces. I'm not trying to get you to change your mind." "I know," I said softly. And I realized it was true. The money wasn't the point anymore. "Dad would be happy about this," she said, looking around. "All of us. Working on something that matters." Marcus had his own revelation. He arrived one Saturday with materials for the new bookshelves. "I sold the car," he announced casually. "Which car?" I asked, though I knew. "The sedan, the one you and Dad always said was too much." I stopped what I was doing. "Why?" He shrugged, but his eyes were emotional. I realized I didn't need it. It was about impressing people. I used some of the money to start a scholarship fund at the community college. In Dad's name. I looked at my son, this man who had lost his way, and I saw a glimpse of the boy he used to be. The boy who once gave his allowance to a classmate who couldn't afford lunch. Your father would be so proud, I said. Leon was the most confused by their change. Grandma, he said one afternoon as we planted flowers by the library entrance. I don't get it. 6 months ago they wouldn't even visit. Now they're here every day. What changed? I thought for a moment, my hands busy in the dirt. Sometimes people lose their way, I finally said. They get so busy chasing things they think are important, money, status, that they forget what is important. And sometimes, it takes a shock to make them realize it. Like Grandpa's death, and you changing the will. Maybe. Or maybe it's just seeing you, the next generation, living by different values, showing them a better path. Do you think I should trust it? He asked. That it's real? I looked at my grandson, so young but so wise. Trust, but watch, I advised. Time reveals the truth of a person's heart better than any words. 2 months later, the Arthur Dubois Community Library was ready. The shelves were full, the walls painted, the reading nooks cozy. The grand opening was set for a Saturday in June. On the morning of the opening, I arrived early. I wanted a moment alone. The morning sun streamed through the new, large windows. On the main wall, there was a framed photograph of Arthur, taken years ago in his garden. He was smiling, a gardening tool in one hand, a book in the other. Below it, a simple plaque. In memory of Arthur Dubois, who believed books and gardens are where dreams grow. Tears streamed down my face. How he would have loved this. He is seeing it, you know. Leon's voice surprised me. He'd come in silently. In some way, he's here. I nodded, unable to speak. He put his arm around my shoulders. I never could have done this without you, Grandma. It wasn't me, Leon. It was you. Your vision. He smiled, that smile so like his grandfather's. I could only do it because you and Grandpa taught me what matters, and because you had the courage to make a tough call. Marcus and Cynthia arrived together. Marcus carried a box of books on business ethics. Cynthia brought a large, leather-bound guest book. To record the history of this place, she explained. The opening was a huge success. Dozens of people came, families, seniors, teenagers. In the middle of it all, I saw Marcus talking to a group of young men about mentorship. Cynthia was organizing a storytime schedule. Leon was everywhere, connecting people, building community. My neighbors, Samuel and Thelma, found me. Arthur would be beaming, Thelma said. Yes, he would. You know, Samuel said, nodding toward Marcus and Cynthia. They look different. More like they did when they were kids. It was true. There was a lightness to them, an authenticity that had been buried for decades. Sometimes, I replied, we lose our way, and sometimes, thankfully, we find our way back. At the end of the day, the 4 of us sat on the new patio behind the library, where Leon had planted a hydrangea garden. Marcus raised a glass of iced tea. To Arthur, he proposed, who taught us more than we ever acknowledged? To Arthur, we repeated. Returning home that evening, the 4 of us, there was a different feeling in the air. We sat on the front porch, just as we used to when the kids were little. Marcus cleared his throat. Mom, he began, I've thought a lot. About Dad, about our choices, about the will. I tensed. Marcus, Please let me finish. It's not what you're thinking. He took a deep breath. I wanted to say, you were right. About everything. Cynthia and we didn't honor what you and Dad valued, and the decision you made was the right one. I looked at him stunned. It's true, Cynthia added. Leon deserves everything. He understands the value of what you two built. Not just the money, but what it means. Leon looked uncomfortable. We don't need to talk about that. Yes, we do. Marcus insisted. To clear the air. Mom, we want you to know. We respect your decision. We will never contest it. We're not doing any of this. The library, the time, for the money. We're doing it because we finally understood what Dad tried to teach us all our lives. Cynthia finished. That true value isn't in what you have, but in what you build. In the good you do. I looked at my children, these adults who had been strangers for so long, and I finally saw echoes of Arthur in them. Your father would be proud of you right now, I said, holding their hands. And I am too. Later that night, I took out the letter I had written, the one to be opened after my death. I reread the words of disappointment and painful love. They were true when I wrote them, but now, they seemed to belong to a different time, to a different version of us. I folded the letter and put it back in the drawer. Maybe I would rewrite it one day, or maybe it was no longer necessary. Some truths don't need to be written. They live in actions. Arthur always knew that. And finally, perhaps his children were learning it too. The first anniversary of Arthur's passing arrived with the fall. The library was a success. Leon was there constantly, and Marcus and Cynthia remained involved, running mentorship programs and fundraisers. I planned to go to the cemetery alone. I didn't want them to feel obligated. But as I was getting ready, I saw them pull up. Marcus, Cynthia, and Leon. We thought you might want company, Leon said, holding a bouquet of blue hydrangeas. At the cemetery, we stood by the grave. Marcus spoke first. Dad, he said, his voice thick. It took me a long time to understand what you were trying to teach me. I know it's late, but I hope you can see I'm trying to be better. Cynthia stepped up, tears in her eyes. Daddy, I miss you. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I'd given up on everything you valued. Leon was last. He knelt and left the library key on the headstone. I had my own moment, telling Arthur how much I loved him, how things had changed. Mom, Marcus said as we walked back, we'd like to do something, a celebration of Dad's life. We'd like to cook dinner for you, at the house. That afternoon, my kitchen was filled with chaos and laughter as my children, who barely knew how to boil water, tried to recreate Arthur's favorite dishes. When we sat down at the table, Marcus raised his glass. To Arthur Hampton, father, grandfather, husband, the man who taught us the meaning of integrity, even when we weren't listening. To Arthur, we all said. The food wasn't perfect, but the meal was. We told stories. We laughed. Real, genuine laughter. After, Leon brought out a package. It's a project I've been working on, he said. I unwrapped it. It was a beautiful, leather-bound book, Arthur Dubois, A Life of Purpose. Inside were old photos, letters, stories from friends and neighbors. How did you get all this? Uncle Marcus helped contact old coworkers. Aunt Cynthia interviewed neighbors. I just put it all together. I turned the pages, seeing our life. And on the final pages, recent photos, the library being built, Marcus mentoring, Cynthia organizing donations. The last page was a photo of the four of us smiling in front of the library. Below it, a caption, The legacy continues. I closed the book, tears of gratitude running down my cheeks. Mom, Marcus said softly, we know nothing can make up for not being there, but we want you to know. We finally understand, Cynthia finished. What you and Dad tried to teach us, what truly matters. I looked at my children, finally seeing my husband in them. Your father would be so proud of you right now, I said, holding their hands. And so am I. That night, I once again took the letter from the drawer. I reread the words of disappointment and love. They were true, but they were from another time. I put the letter back. It wasn't needed. Some truths live in actions. Jeremiah, Arthur, always knew that. And finally, perhaps his children were starting to learn too. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.